Hey everyone, welcome back to Extra Credit, and this is our 5th episode on the history of ancient Rome. We're going to do something a bit different this time and try to slow the pace down a little bit and try to have some fewer cuts in this video so that those of you who are already ADD don't need to become even more so. So last time when we left things off with the Romans, they had just defeated Carthage in this whole series of wars known as the Punic Wars. And at the end of the Third Punic War, Rome had completely destroyed Carthage, and so now Rome was the undisputed master of the whole Mediterranean world. To give you some idea of what this was like, in 146 BC, at the end of the Punic Wars, Rome controlled about this much territory, and by the end of the next century, so in about 44 BC, Rome would control this much territory. So as you can see, their empire expanded a whole lot in that century after defeating Carthage, and that was because now they had no one really to stand up to them. Carthage had been their toughest enemy around, and with Carthage out of the way, there was no one to really stand in between Rome and world domination. And there were actually lots of Romans who viewed it as sort of a bad thing that they had defeated Carthage like this, because they actually said later on in their history, some of these Roman authors and philosophers had said that it was actually a good thing for Rome to have a good strong enemy like Carthage to balance out the power of Rome and to keep the Romans from becoming too proud. But this period that we're going to look at now, basically over the next 100 years or so, at the end of the Punic Wars up until about 44 BC, this is known as the Late Republic, because this is the time when, according to most Roman historians, the Republic really started to go downhill, and things really began to fall apart in a way that they hadn't before. If you remember from our first couple of episodes, the main idea behind the Republic was to share power broadly amongst the Romans, or at least the wealthy Romans, but have the common people be able to vote here and there and have some political rights. And the whole point was to keep one person from becoming too powerful. That was really the goal of this whole system. But at the end of the Punic Wars, this trend started where these famous and powerful individuals began to become more and more prominent in the Republic, and they started to take more and more power for themselves, and therefore the power-sharing idea of the Republic really started to crumble and to fall apart. To quote a pretty popular movie, or at least it was popular when I was a kid, the rules at this point were more like guidelines than actual rules when it came to how the Republic was supposed to actually function. Now, there wasn't really any one particular event that kicked this thing off, but the one that I like to focus on and that most historians tend to gravitate towards happened in around 133 BC, and it's something that historians refer to as the Gracchus affair. And by historians, I basically mean me, because no actual historian that I know of calls it this, but it's my channel, so we're going to go with that. So the background to the Gracchus affair goes something like this. In the late Republic, there were two main political parties. The one party was called the Populares. The Populares were pretty much politicians who wanted to get the common people on their side. And the root of their name is to be popular. They wanted the common people to like them, and so they supported ideas that the everyday average Romans would be in favor of. On the other hand, there were the optimates, and the optimates means the best ones. So the optimates were the aristocrats, the upper-class Romans, and they wanted to support laws and politicians who would keep the rich and powerful in place. And as we know from watching modern-day America, nothing ever goes wrong when two political parties become completely entrenched and opposed to each other. So the situation really started to get heated up in about 133 BC when a guy named Tiberius Gracchus was elected as tribune of the people. The tribune was a role that a Roman politician could have, and their whole thing was to represent the poor people of Rome, or at least the common people of Rome, and they had basically two powers. One power was to propose new laws and legislation for the government. The other power was to veto laws and legislation. Veto is a Latin phrase that means something like this. Ain't nobody got time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. Ain't nobody got time. Ain't nobody got time. Ain't nobody got time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. Ain't nobody got time. Ain't nobody got time. Ain't nobody got time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. That's a rough translation. So Tiberius was part of the Populare faction. What that meant was that he wanted to make laws that would benefit the common people of Rome. That was his whole goal. And one of the biggest changes that he wanted to make, and that others wanted to make as well, had to do with the idea of land reform. And what I mean by land reform is that he wanted to change the way that land was distributed amongst the people of Rome. As you can probably imagine, the rich people, like the senators for example, owned tons of land, way more than they could ever actually really need or use. Well, they could always find a use for it, I suppose, but they didn't really need it. Whereas the common people didn't own very much land at all. And so Tiberius's idea, which as you can see will cause no problems whatsoever, is to take away land from the rich people and give it to the poor people. Everybody loves this idea if you're poor. The rich actually not so much. And the name of this law is the Lex Agraria, which basically means land law. Very exciting. Now, what happened next was the Optimates were absolutely furious about this proposed land law, and so they got their own tribune elected, and his name was Octavius, and he is a tribune of the people, but he's basically working for the Optimates. He's working for the rich people. And his job is to veto the Lex Agraria, which he does. He makes it impossible for this law to get passed because the common people are not allowed to vote on it until Octavius withdraws his veto, which he's not going to do anytime soon. So in response to this, Tiberius ups the game to like level 11, and he vetoes every single item on the government's agenda, period. The government can do nothing at all until Octavius withdraws his own veto on the Lex Agraria, so they can vote on that and pass that. This is what we call a deadlock. Everything is shut down, nothing is working, people aren't getting paid, the government isn't functioning. Basically, political life in Rome grinds to a halt. Again, just turn on CNN or Fox and you'll see this going on south of the border. Now, this is pretty bad, and Tiberius knows that it's his legislation, the Lex Agraria, that's at the heart of it, that's causing all the problems. And so what he does is, instead of taking that off the table, he goes all in and proposes something completely insane. He proposes that the common people remove Octavius from his office as tribune. This wasn't technically illegal, but it had never ever been done before. It wasn't really breaking a rule because the rules didn't even imagine that this type of thing could even happen. And so Tiberius goes to the common people and proposes that they fire Octavius as tribune, and the common people, of course, who are pretty much behind Tiberius, they vote to get rid of Octavius as tribune. And now the way is finally open for the Lex Agraria to get voted on and passed, which it does. Now, all of this doesn't seem that exciting to us, perhaps, because after all, it's politics, and politics without Donald Trump isn't really that exciting. But you have to understand how groundbreaking all of this was. Nobody had ever bent or broken so many rules like this before until Tiberius came along, and he knew he was in really hot water. However, one way to escape that was by becoming tribune again for a second year in a row, because it was illegal to prosecute somebody for crimes while they still held office. And also, this way, he can make sure that the Lex Agraria actually gets done properly and that the land really does get redistributed. Again, doesn't seem that crazy to us, but nobody in Rome was allowed to hold the same office twice in a row. It just was not done, ever. So now the Optimates, who are Tiberius's enemies, the rich people, they're absolutely furious once again, and they're scared now because they think Tiberius is about to make himself into the worst thing of all time for the Romans, a king. They think that he's trying to take too much power. So the Optimates get together, they marshal a whole bunch of their followers, and they march down to the Roman Forum. They massacre about 200 or so of Tiberius's own followers, and then they kill Tiberius himself by clubbing him to death with broken furniture. So if you think politics in America are messed up right now, you really haven't seen anything yet. So the Gracchus affair ended really badly for Tiberius and for his followers, but later on Tiberius's younger brother Gaius Gracchus would actually come along and try to do pretty much the exact same thing in the same way. He tried to pass legislation too quickly, he offended his political enemies, and they killed him. Now, most historians who look at the Gracchus brothers would basically say they were good guys trying to do some good stuff, but they went way too fast. They should have slowed down, put the brakes on a little bit, and tried to introduce some of these new laws more slowly. But what I really want to focus on is how they bent the rules of the Republic to use them for their own purposes. This sort of trend had happened a little bit in previous Roman history, but it was going to become way more of a thing now, where politicians would try to get around the rules or bend the rules so they could advance their own agendas and see their own goals achieved. This really went against the whole purpose of the Republic, which was, again, to share power broadly and to follow a respected rule system so no single individual was able to rise to the top by enacting their own legislation and steamrolling the opposition. And so what Tiberius Gracchus had shown people was that if you tried hard enough, you could bend the rules far enough so that you could probably get your own way. The problem, though, is that, kind of like a slinky, you bend it too much and it's never really going to go back to the way it was before. And so that was basically the trend in Roman politics. Now, people are going to start coming to the surface who are going to be bending the rules further and further and further until the whole republic just won't function. And that's going to lead us to a very interesting guy named Sulla. And we are going to see him next time. We'll see you later.